So welcome back, everyone. From what I could see, it looks like you had pretty lively parallel sessions. I hope you had some good insights and exchanges at those, and perhaps also over lunch. In just a moment, we are going to move on to what is an annual highlight at Transforming Transportation. And now that I learned a bit more over lunch about who Lee Schipper was, I have to say I'm even more honored to be able to announce this session. But before I do that, I just want to once again name and thank all of our sponsors and partners who do make TT19 possible. So our sponsor PTV Group, also our partners, the African Development Bank, the FIA Foundation, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, the SLOCAT Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, and also our session sponsors, that's the UK Department for International Development, DFID, International Civil Aviation Organization, and the German organizations, the GIZ, the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, the German Environmental Ministry, Agrarverkehrswende, and the Sustainable Mobility Initiative TUMI. So many, many thanks to all of them for making this possible. And we do move on now to the Lee Schipper Memorial Scholarship presentations, and it is a great pleasure to hand over the stage to Holger Dalkman of SLOCAT and also to Mans Lönnroth of the Volvo Research Education Foundation, former State Secretary in Sweden. So take it away, gentlemen, and we look forward to hearing more.
Thank you, Melinda, and welcome also to this session. And it's a true honor also to be here and to talk about the scholarship. So welcome also to the sixth session around that. So we actually set the scholarship up together also with a Schipper family, and unfortunately also Ramon Munoz Ruskin, who also was in fact also fundamental also to help also with this setup and works for the World Bank, can't be also here. So I will also moderate together with my board member Mons. But also you see also the scholars far to the right here. So we really also want to encourage also young people also to take action. But the scholarship is really about bringing together so new research, which is transformative, which is data-driven, and really also challenge conventional wisdom. So the work also that Lee always had done also in the past. It's every year, and you will get as a scholarship $10,000 US. You will also get a mentorship program. You also have the opportunity here also to speak, and we will hear from them also in a minute, as well as also have access to the Volvo Research Foundation network, which is also absolutely great. I also like to announce, and I'll be really happy also, that also the Volvo Research Foundation is in fact also supporting us as a scholarship. And where is the one? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. And we can applaud that. So that allows us really also to carry on. So let's talk a little bit about Lee, and would like to ask also Mons to really also share just also some words about Lee before we also move to the scholars. Thank you.
Thanks, Holger. I would like to say a few words about Lee and the Lee Schipper Memorial Scholarship. But first, let us see how many in the audience have listened to Lee. Quite a few of us. And how many scholars, Lee Schipper scholars, are there in the audience?
Stand up.
Stand up, please. Now, the secret of Lee is that he was not a transport expert, but he had the gift to look from the outside into a field and see something different than people inside the field not always saw. He was also one of the originators of the Transforming Transportation, yes, in those days when it was a small and cozy and intimate group. Lee was a professional outsider. I first met him in the 1970s when he transformed himself from being a vibraphone-playing astrophysicist to a vibraphone-playing outsider who single-handedly created the international field of comparing energy use of different countries. Some 25 years later, he transformed himself once again into an outsider when he started to look at transport data. And he had the gift to see from the outside in transport data what could be transformative. More than that, he was a storyteller. No one could beat Lee in telling a story about data, with pictures and everything. And those of you who remember him will always remember him as a storyteller as well as a data man. And this is where he inspires us still, both being able to tell a story and to see what is transformative in data. So the Lee Schipper Memorial Scholarship would like to stimulate exactly this, young scholars to look for what is transformative in existing data. Thank you. Now Holger.
Thank you, Måns, and I should actually also let you know that you can currently also apply. And please also ask us also, or look just also for the Lee Schipper Scholarship. Spread also the word so that there is also more opportunities there and very great young talent. So one of the young talents is in fact Junia Compostela. She is a PhD student at UC Davis, and I'm very excited also now also to listen to you. Junia, the floor is yours.
So hello, everybody. I'm very honored to be here. I'm Junia Compostela, PhD student at UC Davis. With this project, I want to understand what are the causes of right sourcing disruption in 4 main cities around the world: Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Beijing, and Mumbai. So here, a brief overview of the right sourcing user penetration rate in 2019 at a country level. So we have China that is, has the highest, and India has the lowest. So our research inspires other research in the same area done in other parts of the world. For example, in California, right sourcing had positive effect, reduced driving, and negative effect, reduced public transit and walking and biking trips. And other segment of the industry has been affected. For example, the taxi industry, especially in the last 4 years, has been extremely affected by right sourcing. Here's another example of a survey in the Boston area where public transit, taxi, driving trips, walk and bike trips has been substituted by right sourcing and added new trips too. But what are the causes of this disruption? So, for example, these SF trips have monetary costs attached, so the cost of energy, the cost of the fare of the trip. But there are other costs called hedonic costs that are associated to the transportation modes and that affect the perception of the cost of a trip. So, for example, the cost of time wasted for traveling, or the cost of searching for a parking spot, or potentially the cost of a bad quality of a trip. Right sourcing people, for example, there are a lot of research in this area already. So there are hedonic factors that, again, are factors that encourage or discourage individuals to select a specific travel modes. And in this example, people selected right sourcing to have a better use of travel time, or to avoid parking paying or bad weather condition potentially. In this other example, in US, people chose right sourcing for better convenience, reliability, or quality of the trip. And in this other example, we have avoiding impaired driving, parking pain, convenience, or stress. So we understand that attached to mode and technology there are monetary costs, but also there are, again, hedonic factors. So for example, parking pain, time, trip quality, safety and security, and sharing a ride with a stranger, and many others. So we want to ask what are the factors, monetary but especially hedonic, that impact the travel mode decision of individuals. And then how are these factors changing mode shares? So we have 4 main steps in our project in Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, and Beijing. We already launched a travel survey with the WRI. We will focus on the last commute trip data, the origin and destination of this trip, the respondent social demographic data, and the hedonic factor data that are relevant to the trips, the mode selected by the respondents. So this question is extracted by our survey. It's the hedonic question. So we investigated time, reliability, safety, comfort, sitting next to a stranger, and parking pain of the most commute trip. Based on this question, we want to identify what are the significant factors that encourage or discourage the individual. And then ultimately, the challenge is to attach a monetary value to these hedonic factors. And we want to end with a policy briefing phase on hedonic factors that impact the individuals. For example, we have parking pain that creates stress, but the stress leads people to take other choices. So for example, they give up shopping, and then they will damage local businesses. So this has an impact also not only on the individual, but also external impacts. So hedonic factors are a new additional source of information. And so there is, on the supply side, they offer strategies that offer something to incentivize a more sustainable behavior. And on the demand side, they again inform strategies that require something that encourage a more sustainable behavior. So in conclusion, with this project, we believe that mobility firms will gain better insight into consumer preferences surrounding hedonic costs and offer better services. We believe that we will create a flow of information that brings mutual benefit and increased trust between mobility companies and public firms. And we believe that we can suggest new sources of income to, for example, municipalities to reinvest in sustainable projects. That's it.
Thank you, Juno. Excellent presentation, and thanks again, and congratulations. By the way, so we talked this morning, and when I asked her what she might like to do, she said she's looking also for an internship or so in a mobility company or so. So find her, talk to her. She's great. So with that also to our second candidate, Jaime Power. So sorry, I can't still not pronounce it properly, but he's a PhD student from the University of Santiago de Chile. And so please join us, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Please let me start with an anti-poem from one of the greatest minds of Chile has ever had, Nicanor Parra. It says, there are 2 pieces of bread. You eat both, I eat none. Average consumption, 1 bread per person. So now let's rephrase it a little bit. There are now 2 buses. Yours travels empty, mine travels full. Average occupancy, 50%. Pretty good, isn't it? So even though this is technically correct, as 1/2 of the buses are running at full capacity, this underestimates a lot the level of service actually experienced by users, because most of users are traveling indeed in the full bus. These, among others, are are the most critical impacts an uneven headway operation has, and irregularity is the core of system reliability. Thus, my thesis is called Public Transport Reliability Causes and Effects. To address this research, we have formulated 4 different questions we would like to answer, and they are: the first one, firstly, we are interested to know what are the level of reliability different public transportation modes have, especially in Santiago, Chile, where this research is focused, but it's also part of many different cities worldwide. We have noticed that when we analyze the difference between the Monday longest travel with the average, the difference always increases for every public transportation mode. But this difference is only noticeable for bus modes. As for metro mode, it's always shorter than 5 minutes. More interestingly, based on GPS data and smart car information, we notice that people with the most unreliable travel experience are willing to pay 22% more in order to have a perfect reliable travel. The second question is, we're interested to know which factors promote or depress service reliability or headway regularity. I believe we have all observed this situation, a heavy bunch operation of buses. What we are interested to know is how different characteristics promote or depress uneven headways at 2 different levels, at the dispatch in the terminal and among the bus routes. So far, among different other characteristics, we have found that segregated lanes and off-board fare collection has a significant impact decreasing irregularity, and traffic lights density have a significant impact increasing irregular operations. Thirdly, we are interested to know what characteristic or what affects user satisfaction. Uneven headways and uneven operation in terms of headways has a very significant effect on user satisfaction. It deteriorates it because, on average, it increases the average passenger density experienced by users. We also find out that women and millennials are more sensitive to crowding when they evaluate the system. And more interesting, we notice that averaging unweighted occupation across vehicles, as can be seen in the yellow dot above the green one, overestimates satisfaction. So if we really care about understanding the actual level of service experienced by users, what we need to do is to properly weight all of key performance metrics. Finally, we would like to know what characteristics affects, in terms of reliability, users' choices or users' alternative choices, based on a stated preference survey. So typical SP questions are like this. When they show attributes, they show an average experience. And this is not very similar, or it doesn't reflect actually the actual level of service that public transportation have, because it assumes that every day is the same. So what we are doing is that we're proposing in the second phase of our research is to show 5 different days in order to present what we think is an actual or typical week of usage of a public transportation system. Then we will need to understand how a difference in headway regularity, frequency, demand, and travel time affect user choice. So we all know, and along this research, we have found that irregular headway had several impacts. And together with other members at the Catholic University of Chile, we have found that it increases the system cost, increases average waiting time and its variability, deteriorates the average comfort, promotes fare evasion, and also it reduces user satisfaction. Cities need their citizens to use public transport. We all know that, if we want to achieve a sustainable development. This is easier if citizens are satisfied or they like their public transportation experience. So to do that, what at least we need is to know what users seek when they are traveling in public transportation, at least operationally speaking. So in that terms, we know they want to travel which is fast, has short waits, is comfortable, and also reliable. And for decades, we have been addressing mainly the first 3 of them, by increasing speed, with BRTs as a clear example. But with regular headways, we know we can address all of them. How? At least tricky aspect to finish this presentation. First, it's important to promote and encourage specialized infrastructure for public transportation, and especially for buses, as segregated lanes or off-board fare collection. Secondly, it's important to dispatch buses regularly, or vehicles in general regularly, but also it's important to manage their headways by an online control system. And finally, what maybe it provokes more our traditional wisdom on public transportation, what we really need to do also is to always weight our key performance indicators by demand. If our real focus is to satisfy citizens' needs in terms of traveling, our key performance indicators must be weighted by use. Otherwise, they won't reflect the actual performance, the actual experience of users. Thus, maybe time has come to add a new R to our approach, because we know we don't only need rapid transit, every day is clearer that we need a more reliable public transportation. So thank you very much for your attention to the Schipper and the WRI and Juan Carlos Muñoz and Sebastián Rabot, because without their support and commitment, I couldn't have reached so far. Thank you.
Great job. And by the way, also he told me this morning also he'd like to also continue on a career on teaching. So in case also he wouldn't ever to leave also Chile also talk to him. So again, there's a big applause also for the two scholars. Many thanks also to the World Research Foundation. My special thanks also to the World Resources Institute and the World Bank, still also giving us these great people also really a chance here also to speak. Thanks also to the board members, including also Sam Zimmerman, who is also here and with us. And now also like to just also hand over also to Gerhard Menkhoff, who will share a really special singers with us. Thank you very much again, and have still a wonderful day. Thank you.
It's a bit sad, but I'm going to talk about Slobodan Mitric. Many of you knew him, and I don't think anybody who knew him did not appreciate him and love him. Most of you will know that he died after a long illness last May. And I think I want to tell you a little bit about his life in a little time. He was born during the Second World War in 1941 in Serbia, what is now Serbia. His village was occupied. His father had died in the war. And so he lived without a father on the farm, and he was tending sheep and do things which you had to do. One of the stories which I think is typical is that the story goes that he was tending the sheep, and at the same time he was reading a book. So that's Slobodan, and probably he even kept the sheep under control. But he was a special person even as a kid. In 1964, then, he graduated from Belgrade University in transportation engineering. After that, he did his compulsory year of military service for the Yugoslav People's Army. And there's a nice story, which it is also typical of Slobodan, that, okay, so it was a rough time, and often they didn't have water where he was serving. And that's where he learned how to appreciate wine. And that has continued throughout his life, one part of his character. After that, he moved to Copenhagen and worked for 2 years as an engineer, traffic engineer in the city. And then 2 years later, he moved to Berkeley, where he stayed there several years, 5 years, I think, and got himself a master's degree and a PhD. He was also a research assistant there. And interestingly enough, that we are now talking about Lee Schipper, he actually got to know Lee Schipper when they were both in their 20s. Lee, at that time, I think he was obviously studying music, and so he was in a music store, and Slobodan was interested in anything, including music. So they got to know each other, and I think they well, they didn't know that much later they would see themselves in a different context again. After he graduated from Berkeley, he worked 2 years in the private sector with Bechtel, and then returned to academia and was 5 years assistant professor at Ohio State University. I understand that there he revamped the graduate program of the Ohio State University in transport engineering, and in recognition got the Distinguished Teaching Award, which was a special award. Then in 1978, he joined the World Bank, which was the beginning of his 25 years in this institution. He rose up, he was finally lead transport specialist, and then after he retired in 2003, he continued many years as a consultant, and many of you will have met him then too. In addition to his project work, he wrote many papers, transport strategy papers for many cities in Asia, in Africa, and Eastern Europe. He wrote papers and participated in conferences of the Transport Research Board, CODATU, Threadbo, PTRC, and others. And I think significantly for us transport freaks, was that he wrote back in the late 90s this report on approaching metros as potential development projects. That was at the time when the World Bank really didn't like metros. And he opened maybe the eyes to some people that they are worthwhile thinking about. He then, his last report, he wrote many other reports, but his last report was it's called World Bank's Engagement with Transport in Cities, the Early Years. It was a historical, retrospective of how the World Bank got involved in urban transport lending going back to the 60s and 70s. And it's really a very interesting book. This book is, by the way, available for anybody who wants it in the foyer where they sell coffee, or the cell where you have coffee. There, on a first come, first served basis, you can get a copy of that report. Yeah. Slobodan was a very unusual person. And he combined, well, first, great intellect. He was really very smart. But at the same time, he was not just an engineer. He loved art and poetry. He had a fantastic talent for expressing himself, both verbally and in writing. Some of his reports are really just a pleasure to read from the viewpoint of English. In addition, he was very charming and a warm person. And in addition, he enjoyed life. And he liked to have fun. So those who knew him, we are all sad that he is no longer among us. But we are also grateful that our paths have crossed in the past. Thank you.